Let me first tell you why the Europeans feel it necessary to rearm Europe. It largely has to do with the Trump administration's handling of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And there were a couple hiccups that the Europeans see there, including, for one, the mischaracterization of Ukraine as the aggressor in the conflict. Secondly, cutting Ukraine temporarily off of military and support and intelligence sharing. And thirdly, indirectly or even directly threatening EU member states that would not pay up to the expected 2% of NATO to cut off NATO security guarantees in case of a Russian invasion of Europe more generally. So the Europeans really committed themselves to rearming in Europe. And just to give you two examples, on the one hand, the European Union itself, which is the overarching framework in which 27 member states cooperate with each other. The European Union, last week, the Commission President von der Leyen came up with a defense package worth up to 800 billion euros. In reality, probably only 150 billion euros will be spent of that to produce more joint European defense capabilities. And that also means buying more European weapons rather than, as in the past, buying more from the Americans, for example. And in my own native country, Germany, we just had the recent elections at the end of February, and the incoming chancellor pushed a government bill through that allows for up to 400 billion new spending just on Germany's military. That's on top of already 100 extra billion that have been committed after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So you can really see here that the Europeans are gung-ho on rearming Europe, given the increased security threats that they see, not only, of course, from the regime threat from Putin in the east, but increasing also because they feel they cannot rely on the US as a reliable ally. Well, so just to give you my impression of what I think about NATO and the future of NATO, with or without the US, really, NATO has been declared dead multiple times over since the end of the Cold War in 1991. Yet, NATO really has shown remarkable resilience in not only surviving, but actually thriving. I mean, in fact, because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, NATO gained most recently 2 members, Sweden and Finland, who used to be neutral countries, right? So in that sense, I do think NATO will exist also because the US or the US President Trump will not be able to easily exit NATO because the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in fact, in 2023, pushed a bill through Congress that prohibits the unilateral withdrawal of the US without congressional approval. So you see here, we are connected through NATO, the Europeans as well as the Americans. Now, but however, that doesn't mean that NATO needs to change or NATO will change. And of course, there has been the long-standing US expectation of European countries to pay a minimum of 2% of their GDP into defense expenditures. And now this 2% goal or benchmark is already outdated. We heard from the Trump administration sort of more going towards 3%, 3.5% higher. And the Europeans are really trying to follow that expected trajectory of increasing defense expenditures. So in that sense, expenditures have been already up after the Ukraine was invaded in 2022, up by 30%. And again, Europeans are now putting in a lot of money. I mean, for example, Financial Times analysts have calculated that Germany can indeed spend up to 2 trillion more on defense and infrastructure over the next decades. That's, by the way, 2,000 billions. So here we're talking about potential huge sums. But we will have to see, of course, if the words are being followed with actions and if those actions are actually contributing to a modernized NATO that is sufficiently able to satisfy both the US, which for the most part now supports financially as well as technology-wise NATO. And we will have to see if the Europeans can match up to that in order for NATO to remain a bulwark against international aggression against the Western world. Well, if you ask me what this poses for nuclear proliferation and a new world order, let's first talk about the question of nuclear proliferation. I honestly don't think that it will lead to a major increase in nuclear powers, even though there has been recently more talk about this, because nuclear weapons, while they are a good deterrent, they are really expensive. And so now with new military technologies, including the use of AI, including drones and so on, I think there's a lot of more weaponry that has literally a better return on investment. However, of course, the Europeans are afraid that the US may cut off the nuclear security umbrella that the US traditionally has provided to Europe. And so there we've seen, for example, that the French government now has made the step to potentially offer other European countries their nuclear defense should the US withdraw from that. But what is certain is that this spells out the end of the so-called liberal international order, or LIO as we call it. The liberal international order was a post-war US-built global economic system that also was very multilateral, that involved the UN, that involved the Bretton Woods Institution, that also had a lot of US engagement internationally. And we've seen that, not only through the pressures from non-Western countries such as Russia and China, who would of course like to become a competitor to the US, but also through the US's increasing isolationist tendencies now under the Trump administration. We've seen that the liberal international post-war order that we knew is dead. The question is, what will come with that? And the Europeans really, while they try to fill in now the shoes of development aid, where USAID has been cut with in terms of global environmental protection, where the US has withdrawn from the post-Kyoto treaties, including the Paris Agreement, we see that the Europeans will have big shoes to fill in if they want to basically not create a vacuum that then autocrats across the world could fill in.